Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I've got an interesting couple to introduce you to tonight. They're from Ottawa in Canada, but the wife Maria is Russian, and the husband Dmitry is Ukrainian, and they've got family in both Moscow as well as in a couple different cities in Ukraine. And this war has been obviously impacting them. Maria, welcome to the show. Tell me a little bit about what's been going on with you, with your husband, with your families. I can't imagine how difficult it must be.
Yeah, so I'm actually half Russian, half Yemeni, born in Moscow, grew up in Yemen, moved here for university and became Canadian. But it is quite difficult for us, right? Because Putin is, especially with COVID, has gone paranoid and is not altogether there. So we've been hearing very disturbing things from Moscow that Putin is not altogether there.
Not altogether there. That's your perception from people, not from the press here, but from people in Moscow itself.
Yes, because during the pandemic, he got very paranoid. As you can see, the large tables with Macron and so on, isolated, and he surrounded himself with yes men. So, and he started doing really odd things, so especially with Shoigu. So people have been thinking there is something really off. And of course now he has put the head of FSB under house arrest, blamed Shoigu, and because what happens if you surround yourself with yes men are paranoid from the pandemic, you are paranoid, everyone telling you what you want to hear.
So
then, it's quite easy to go mental.
I've had several people tell me that he firmly believes his own propaganda.
It's worse than that. He's getting old and a bit senile and not altogether there anymore. Because when he was younger, he didn't get to power by believing his own propaganda. He had good people around him, right? So, but then over time, it's a very trying position and you age quickly, right? And especially if you're the head of a country that invades other countries, goes to war, things like that. So the head of the GRU, or the Russian military intelligence, the equivalent of the Pentagon. So the one who was responsible for the war in Syria, he disappeared and we think he was assassinated. And then the next one got assassinated. And then they get replaced by a series of yes men. So as you can expect, right? If they're replaced by a series of yes men over time, this messes up anyone's mind, right? So Putin, over time, he's getting older and he prefers people to coddle his ego. And people will tell him anything that he wants to hear, even though it's false. And he's also been going a bit on power trips. There are rumors of him, consulting astrologists and all these New Age stuff instead of the Orthodox Church. There are quite a few really bizarre. But the man is losing, if people's mind is really taxed in such a position, they tend to lose the mind when they're old. Look at Gaddafi, right? When Gaddafi came to power, he did positive things for Libya, right? And as he was old, you could see he was losing his mind. My father's employer, my father was advisor to Yemen's president, Ali Saleh. Ali Saleh was very sharp when he worked for him. But Ali Saleh, as he got old, it's a very taxing position, you age prematurely. He lost his mind and first crisis, and my father warned him there would be an Arab Spring, and if he wasn't intelligent economically, he'd lose his head. And that's precisely what happened to him. So, it's so what we've been hearing with Putin was in terms of his mental health and what he's been doing, he's not quite there, and surrounding himself by yes men and who tell him what he wants to hear and elaborate and brighten the colors, And, it's very much, the Iraq War, right? That he was told, George Bush was told it would be a cakewalk, right? So Putin was told that, oh, the whole Ukraine is Crimea and you'd be welcomed as a liberator, right? And they did bizarre things like bombing Ukraine, bombing Kiev at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 22nd. Well, that's when the Nazis bombed Kiev, and that's how in World War II we learned there was a war. And also bombing Kharkov that demoralizes Russian troops.
How does that demoralize Russian troops? I don't understand. I apologize.
We've developed an interest in Hitler. Okay, so Putin has, for hearsay, developed an interest in Hitler and Napoleon, with the pandemic just going a little odd. But, in Russia, what's really important to us is our grandfathers in the Great War, right? Fighting the Nazis. This is our identity in a way, because our grandfathers fought, right? It's for Russians a holy war. And then, every year we remember our grandfathers on May 9th. And this year, they fought really hard in Kiev because Hitler bombed Kiev, right? At 4 o'clock in the morning on the 22nd. And that's how World War II started. And out of every 50 Russian men who went to the front, only one would return alive, like my grandfather.
Of every 50 men that went to the front during World War II, only one returned alive.
Would come back alive. And often, my grandfather was lucky. He came back with 2 arms and 2 legs. That was very special. All right.
Chatting tonight with Maria, and your husband's name is Dmitry. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dmitro.
Maria is Russian Yemen, and
yes.
Dmitro is Ukrainian. So effectively, some of Maria's country people are bombing some of Dmitro's country
yes.
people. We're going to take a break and come back, and I'm going to ask Dmitro if he can share with us how his family is doing and what stories he's heard. Stay with us, everybody. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So a friend that I've interacted with before and interviewed on fashion from Ottawa is Maria Al-Masani. She is of Russian Yemen background. Her husband, who also lives and works in Ottawa, Dimitrov, is of Ukrainian background. And so it's kind of a strange situation. And actually, I've heard of numerous different people that have got a family that are on both sides of the Ukrainian-Russian border. And so I think that this is a challenge for a lot of people. And I think there's statistics that suggest there's as many people in Ukraine that have blood relatives in Russia as there are Canadians who have blood relatives in the United States. And so the border, while all of us think about the border between Canada and the United States as two sovereign countries, as Ukraine and Russia did, there's clearly a lot of people that have family on both sides and have traveled to both sides and have done business on both sides. So it's got to be a very strange situation. Dmitrov, I wonder if you could tell us, you've got family, I understand, in Kiev and Kharkov, is that correct?
So I have a third grand aunt who lives in Kiev right now. So, and I have a few friends in Kharkov as well.
Tell me, have you been able to be in communication with them? And
yes, I was. They're all safe. They're all good. With my friends in Kharkov, I just talked over Telegram and everything. Every day we exchange like info and stuff. So, and my mother regularly calls my third grand aunt. She was about 500 meters away from the road that the Russian troops tried to take into the city in the first, 3 days of war. But those Russian troops didn't get that far. They were destroyed from everywhere and they had to pull back, and that was 2 weeks ago, and we're still there and holding strong.
We understand that it's Kharkiv. Is that how?
Kharkiv.
Kharkiv. I understand that it's been bombed almost mercilessly. Is that correct?
Yes, it's been bombed every day around it. So they just start hitting civilian infrastructure. They start hitting hospitals and schools, and Kharkiv municipal workers are doing a great job trying to keep the heat and power going to some of the buildings, but it's becoming more and more like some of the Syrian cities in the Syrian civil war, with the destruction that Russians unleash upon the city and civilians.
And if this is a great aunt, is she elderly, I presume?
My grand aunt, yeah, she's like in her early 80s.
What can someone like that do? They
No,
can't
but
be a refugee and
my
travel.
grand aunt that she's in Kiev. Well, she has like her children and grandchildren like living with her, and that's she lives in the part of the house which I used to visit pretty much every summer. So
Someone like
to me,
that,
of
there's
course,
no
it's
way that
personal.
they could be a refugee and travel all the way to Poland, is there?
It's a possibility, but then again, Kiev, I would say, it's probably safer than Kharkiv or anything, because a lot of the people are just coming to its defense right now. So even if Russians will try to make another move, as we hear in some of the news that might attempt to, they're gonna pay like an extremely heavy price. So the people there are feeling like probably even safer staying there rather than trying to move and like leave a lot of the stuff that they've accumulated over their whole lives. It's like their whole livelihoods, and if somebody is like 80, it just harder for them, because they really remember the previous war and the previous destruction that was brought upon Ukraine by Hitler, and then of course all the difficulties rebuilding everything after the war. So to them it's like a very scary flashback.
I visited Kiev,
Mhm.
I guess, in late in 2008, 2009, and I went to a museum that was, I presume, a war museum, and it had
Yeah.
pictures of every person that had died during World War II, and there were, a million pictures that they had up on little threads all the way around this whole big facility. It was unbelievable. Ukraine was impacted very negatively during World War II. It ended up being, one of the centers of both Allied and Axis, war as the Germans marched in, and then the Russians marched the Germans back out. Ukraine suffered, and then the Holodomor was also, I think, an equally devastating, if not more devastating, experience.
For the war, a few years. Yeah. So
Ukraine, tell me a little bit about how people in Ukraine, Maria, are and Dimitrov are dealing with this. Do you think?
I am amazed at the self-reliance and the resilience that people are not intimidated by the failing Russian army, and people know that this operation was not very well thought through. It's going to be a second Afghanistan for Russia, and sadly a lot of young men, they're just told, oh, you're going for a training exercise, and then they return in a coffin. So the numbers are getting very close to what Afghanistan was when they had anti-war sentiment.
What Maria, do you speak to anyone of your family members or friends in Russia, and tell me what is, I guess we've heard reports of people protesters being jailed. What's the average person in Russia thinking of all of this, or are they believing the propaganda?
The average there are different Russians, right? The closer you are to the regime, you think, oh my gosh, this is stupid. How dumb. How dumb, right? So, and then others are thinking, oh no, my OnlyFans, my Instagram, I cannot post half naked in a bikini. Wow, Coca-Cola and Starbucks and McDonald's are going. This is literally a second Holocaust that I cannot get my Starbucks latte. It's the Germans raiding Moscow. This is the siege of St. Petersburg. I cannot get my Starbucks latte, this is the end of the world. So that is sadly a reaction of the average Russian to this. You know,
what you're suggesting is that sanctions are actually hurting you're mocking them, but the sanctions are actually having an impact.
Yeah, well, of course, what I'm mocking is when people put McDonald's and Starbucks ahead of human life. You know, one should have compassion for human life. Okay, Putin brought back the Orthodox Church. Well, what does the church say? God is love. You have to have compassion for human life. And no, they have compassion for that there's the Russian latte is not as good as the Starbucks latte. So people are quite upset. And that they have to use Kentucky instead of Instagram, and you know, oh no,
they can't monetize it.
Now, Dmitry, there is two churches two main churches in Ukraine. One is the Ukrainian Catholic Church, and the other is the Russian Orthodox Church. And there's been reports that the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine has been very supportive of Putin because of the connection, obviously, to.
So first of all, okay, I must correct you there. There is actually like 3 Orthodox churches in Ukraine. One is the independent, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The other one is like the main, Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And then a small minority is the Moscow Patriarchate Orthodox Church, which actually was kind of split because, there was one church that, for example, was stockpiling some weapons and stuff for the advancing Russian troops. There was the other Moscow Patriarchate specific church that actually asked people to pray for Ukrainian army, and of course we also have Ukrainian Catholic Church, in the areas of like Western Ukraine, we have like actual Catholic Church a bit. And we also have like a Jewish and Muslim. So it's, I wouldn't refer to the, Orthodox Church as the Russian Orthodox Church, as it's only a small part of, the total number of Orthodox churches in Ukraine.
So Poroshenko, what he did, which was quite notable, is he broke off the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from the Moscow Patriarchate. So they have a separate, so Ukrainian Orthodox is not the same as Moscow.
Yeah.
And that was actually very notable because it's very rare in Orthodox history to have such a schism.
To have it's not, I wouldn't call it a schism, it's more like an autocephaly, as in like recognition of the church amongst the equals, before the Constantinople Patriarchate, rather than a subsidiary of basically a Moscow Patriarchate. So it basically became independent. And so now it's, Ukraine basically can have like their own.
Okay. So I stand corrected. I apologize. But is it true that these different churches are playing a contradictory role in this war right now, with some supporting Russia and some like churches in Ukraine supporting Russia and Moscow, and others obviously not?
There is an extremely small faction of the Moscow Patriarchate. I said even within that little faction of Ukrainian Orthodox churches, there are some that support Ukraine, so I would say it's not playing that much of a significant role. Like in 2014, if anything, there were like in the Eastern Ukraine, there was some more role that, the Moscow Patriarchate churches played. But like, again, now it's kind of, it's virtually like undetectable.
In Crimea.
Tell me a little bit, Dmitry, about, your family and friends in Ukraine and their attitude right now toward Russia. Because one of the things that astounds me is how can Putin ever believe that after bombing, invading, and ultimately occupying Ukraine, if he's successful, he actually ever thinks they'll actually be part of his country again. They'll be countrymen. They'll be brothers. Like, how is that possible?
So basically, I think with Putin, like he's still stuck in this 2014 picture where they were able to basically, after Yanukovych ran away, they were able to capture Crimea in 2 weeks and everybody welcomed them there. Crimea used to be the most pro-Russian, part of Ukraine. And basically, he thought that the rest of Ukraine now in 2022 will follow suit because he lived in his own imaginary world. And he surrounded himself with people that told him that this is exactly how it's going to happen. We'll be there. It will all be over in 4 days. So people will welcome us with flowers, and he believed it. He believed like his own people, who, of course, their only good competency was to kiss his butt. But when it came to actually planning of an actual military operation, they, pretty much ate their own dog food and believed like their own lies that they said to Putin, so that, he can reward them. And right now, as a result, in Russia, there's a few investigations of those people. There's even, the defense minister is under investigation. The head of the 5th FSB directorate is basically under house arrest. Like all those people who are feeding Putin the information that it will be a cakewalk. And now it turns into like the most bloodiest time for the Russian army since World War II. I think the casualties already exceeded what Soviet Union had lost in Afghanistan for 10 years.
Really?
Yes,
So
it's over 10,000 at least.
what do you think is going to happen if it's going to be like a second Afghanistan, and you've described the destruction as almost like the destruction in the Syrian war? What do you think is going to happen? Is this going to be just a guerrilla war for the next 10 years, or is there going to be a ceasefire? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, it's hard to predict the future, but the thing is, I think Putin had really gambled like a lot on it. I don't think he's going to go away that easily. He is doing like a covert mobilization for probably will increase the size by about another 30 to 40,000 people. And he'll try to, keep sending, the troops in and try to at least reinforce the positions he already captured to try to get like an upper hand, in any type of possible negotiations. But
there is a good chance that because of the Western inaction, that he might realize, okay, you know what Ukrainian men are not as cowardly as other parts of the West. Let's go, and this was a stupid high-risk gamble. It's lower risk to attack the Baltics and send a tactical nuke to Sweden, because on Russian television, they like to test things out. They talked about what if they invade. They also talked about, since Sweden is not a member of NATO, sending the army to the Baltic and throwing a tactical nuke at Sweden so that the NATO capitulates and allows them to take the Baltics. The Baltics would be much easier for Russia to try to take. So that might be, if he gets a very bloody nose, he might turn, especially in the summer. There is also, this ocean is not frozen. They might try to do something with the Navy. So, if Putin loses the Ukrainian front of the war, then to save face, he might hit the Baltics. So that's quite likely, and might shoot something at Sweden to intimidate, because it's not a NATO country, to intimidate.
You said that the West has been inactive. What do you think the West should do? What should NATO do? What should Canada do?
Okay, I think Canada should pressure the United States, or do something with Poland. They should send the planes and the anti-aircraft. Well, I think if, politicians often lie to their constituents, they all do, right, of all parties. Why can't they lie to Putin? Putin sent troops to Ukraine and then said, oh no, we're not sending anyone. And Ukrainians said in the first war,
in 2014.
Right? And they said, you send weapons. They said, no, you can buy the anti-tank guns in a Russian supermarket. So we should do the same thing. We should simply send weapons through Poland and then say, no, we didn't send them. Then we should say the smartest thing. We should have them at the border, and we should have Ukrainian tractors. The ones that pulled the Russian tanks? Well, they should pull the MiGs. And then we could complain, oh, sorry, there was a raid. We were dumb enough to put all the anti-aircraft weapons and planes near the border for doing a test drive, and Ukrainian farmers and truckers came with an ambush and, held everyone hostage at the NATO base and took away the trucks. And they took away the MiGs and anti-aircraft. Mr.
So
Putin,
arm Ukraine, but do it in a way that there's deniability.
Yeah,
absolutely. And blame it on, it's the best to blame it on the farmers and truckers, and then say, you know what, Putin, we promise you as Canada, Justin Trudeau has an excellent experience in freezing the bank accounts of truckers who are very naughty. So we promise you that after the war, because now it's really hard to pin down the bank accounts, but after the war is over, Mr. Justin Trudeau would personally go to Ukraine and seize the bank accounts of deviant Ukrainian trucker and farmer convoy that dragged the weapons from the Polish border and took everyone hostage. We're so sorry, Mr. Putin. We'll swear we will send Justin Trudeau to Ukraine after the war to seize the.
We're gonna
assets.
set up some hot tubs and bouncy castles to prevent Justin Trudeau from doing that. He will be very scared.
Dmitry, can the Ukrainian people withstand what's being thrust at them by Russia?
Yes, they can. The question is only how many civilians Putin is gonna kill. Like right now, it's literally Western inaction is costing Ukrainian civilian lives because Russian military is just like not willing to fight, not able to fight Ukrainians. They might throw in some reservists in, but if anything, they'll be already like so demoralized because like there is a very low morale amongst the Russian soldiers right now. They don't really understand why they need to go and fight this war. Nobody attacked Russia. You know, they've been told one thing, but then they see on the ground something completely different. They, you know, there's some intercepts, you know, of their cell phone conversations, you know, which allege that they're basically told specifically to shoot civilians at this point. Yesterday, there was a press conference of some captured, shot down Russian pilots, you know, and one of them specifically said that, you know, if there is a no-fly zone over Ukraine, the whole thing will be over in like very quickly. So, you know, it just like Western inaction is just costing the lives of the Ukrainian civilians, you know, and well,
like in Syria, no, the lack of a red line. It's, I think Westerners have not had war in a while, so they do not understand genocidal maniacs and murderers. If you are not a killer yourself, it's very difficult to have empathy and put yourself in the shoes of a killer, because killers, they're like bullies, right? And I had a very interesting conversation with a policewoman about violence against women and why men kill their girlfriends and wives. It's the same bullying pattern, you know. It's the bullies are cowards at the end of the day. They're like vultures. They go after weakness. So if you show strength, they back off and they test with discomfort. For example, Putin tried things in Syria. Red line meant nothing, right? And now the world turns its back on the West because the Westerners are seen as weak cowards who do not defend their values, right? So if Westerners, you know, show a bit of
resolve,
muscle, but intelligently, not the big problem with Biden is he's sitting there yapping. He should be like Roosevelt, speak softly, say few words, and carry a big stick. Things should, oh my gosh, we didn't know how those weapons got there, those terrible truckers and
Lend-Lease went on for 2 years in World War II prior to the United States getting directly involved, and because of that, Russia killed a lot more Germans, and a lot of Americans didn't end up dying that would have died if it hadn't been for Lend-Lease providing Russia, Britain, etc., with all of the armaments. Maria, in the people in Moscow, in Russia that you talk to, are they supportive of Putin? Is there any chance that there'll be, regime change in Russia?
So Russians, let's say, they're not like you. Okay. So you have to understand slavery to understand Russians. Most intelligent Russians left the country. Lermontov said, farewell, unwashed Russia, land of master, land of slave. So Russians have a slave mentality from the Mongol times. Most were serfs, and escaped slaves would go to Ukraine. That's why Ukrainians are different. Ukrainians are European. And Moscow was the center of the slave trade. So Moscow is a hybrid of Mongol mentality, and also Slavs who were slaves. And so Belarus is known as White Russia, Ukraine, Poland. It's a different mentality, okay? They're Europeans like you. In a way, you have some connection. Russians, so we're Mongols. And so we have most of our nobility was kicked out by the communists. And, my nobility, the communists killed my great-grandfather and all the men on my mother's side. But so we have a bit of a different mentality than most Russians, but most Russians have this slave mindset that, they need a good master Putin. And they're going to sit and wait. Oh, master is bad, so I can complain about my neighbor. The master is bad, I complain about him, but I do nothing, right?
So you're saying that the chance of regime change of the populace rising up against Putin is very low because of this slave mentality that you described.
Yeah, they sit there and do nothing, right? They always sit there and do nothing. And anyone who's intelligent leaves the country. That's typically Russia.
You know, it's been unbelievably interesting chatting with the two of you. I really appreciate it. You bring a fascinating, different perspective to this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your personal stories as well as your family stories. And please stay in touch. And if you've got any updates on how your family, Dmitry, are doing in Ukraine, in Kharkov and in Kiev, please let us know.
For sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to take a break and come back with some more in just a minute. Stay with us.